Good evening, Trump's family. Welcome back to my channel. Have a nice month, everyone, and God bless you. Thank you for always watching and subscribing to the channel. Everyone, listen to this. Kari Lake said it best. I've got a message for that twice convicted racist Katie Hobbs, who is currently a squatter in the governor's office. Don't get too comfortable, sweetie. Okay, folks. A very clear and concise message from Kari Lake to Katie Hobbs. Don't get too comfortable, sweetie. And look, she isn't just saying that to rile up the crowd. Katie Hobbs isn't in the clear just yet. We got to be real. And look, it was pretty much expected from the start. The idea that Kari Lake was going to win in the courts was always a long shot. And frankly, still is a long shot, because a lot of the evidence that's being presented is after the fact data. There's statistical anomalies, which may or may not prove something when presenting your case in the legal system. You have to definitively prove that malicious action took place. That's hard. You need specific names, you need logs, you need actions, you need witness testimony, CCTV footage, and that's hard to do. But it seems as though in the end, Katie Hobbs' demise as governor of Arizona might not come from the legal system. It might not come from the courts. It might come from the recall process that's building up right now, from the recall process that's currently building up. It's not too far-fetched. I mean, maybe a year and a half ago, I forget exactly when it was, the citizens of California were successfully able to launch a recall election to try to unseat Gavin Newsom. Well, Arizona has a very similar law in place. And the effort to recall Katie Hobbs is building up some serious steam, and you know what might just happen? Alright, folks. So we got this piece right over here from Just the News. One of the most credible news publications. I might add, Arizona Voting Reform Group seeks recall of Governor Katie Hobbs, citing election discrepancies. These irregularities and seemingly intentional interferences have come at the cost of the American people's faith and trust in our election process, said Zachary Taylor, executive director of the Arizona chapter of Americans Against Mail-in Voting. The Arizona chapter of Americans Against Mail-in Voting has launched a campaign to recall a Democrat Governor Katie Hobbs, citing 2022 election discrepancies resulting in a questionable outcome. The MP umbrella was born on November 8, 2022. After witnessing hundreds of election discrepancies nationwide, Executive Director Zachary Taylor told Justin News these regularities and seemingly intentional interferences have come at the cost of the American people's faith and trust in our election process. Arizona GOP gubernatorial nominee Kari Lake lost last year's election to then Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, but has since alleged that rampant voting irregularities in Maricopa County prevented many would-be Lake voters from casting their ballots. Lake's lawsuit is expected to be heard on Wednesday by the Arizona Court of Appeals. Hobbs has requested that the case be thrown out, claiming that her former opponent was unable to prove that millions of Arizonans were disenfranchised during the November 8 election. AMV believes that righting the wrongs of the 2022 midterms in Arizona will pave the way toward election integrity across the country. Many disillusioned cities were told to look at Arizona as a pillar of mass mail-in ballot success, while they look towards adopting a policy similar in their own states. This recall effort is a country-changing event. Tyler told Just the News that the organization is also supporting the recall of other Arizona elected officials. ANV leads recall efforts on multiple individuals in Arizona, such as Hobbs, Adrian Fontaine says, and Chris Maya, is referring to the Governor, Secretary of State, and Attorney General, respectively. And so, of course, the question is, they didn't go into any detail. How does this process work? And can it actually be done? The answer to that question is an absolute resounding yes. Absolutely. It can be done. It's part of Arizona law. Here we have the Arizona Secretary of State.gov website, which outlines the recall process. A recall is a procedure that allows citizens to remove and replace a public official before the end of their term in office. Rs.COVID-19201. A recall may commence after an individual has been in office for 6 months, except for state legislatures, which can be filed 5 days after the start of their first session, and no specific grounds are required. So the first requirement here is that you have to wait 6 months. You can't recall Katie Hobbs after the first day that she's been in office. You have to wait until 6 months into her term. I can't remember the exact date that she was sworn into office off the top of my head, but 6 months really isn't that long. It's not a whole lot of time. In other words, The recall process against Katie Hobbs is going to commence in a very short while here and maybe 3 or 4 months, and the next requirements show you just how plausible it really is. Dates and signature requirements. So for all other officials 6 months after the official is in office, we already read that a recall petition must be submitted within 120 days of the application for recall being approved. Signature requirements require 21% of all votes cast at the last election for all candidates for office is held by that elected official. If 2 or more public officials are elected from one ballot, the following equation will be used to determine signature requirements as outlined: 0.25 times overall votes divided by the number of offices filled, so you only need 25% of votes cast. Well, considering Katie Hobbs just barely scratched that 50% mark and Kari Lake supporters represent 50% of the state, well, 25% seems quite feasible. And it seems even more feasible or we go back to the Katie Hobbs recall article from Just the News covering MV, where we learn that in under just 3 short months, the organization AMV has grown to over 50,000 people nationwide. We have a tremendous network of support and volunteers, as well as a great team behind the name. The grassroots effort has already started. And there are tens of thousands of people located across the United States, and probably 1,000s, if not close to 10,000, maybe even in Arizona alone, that are going to be knocking doors. You can cover a whole lot of distance with that amount of people, meaning they are going to be at every single door in every single neighborhood getting signatures to recall Katie Hobbs, and I think the motivation is going to be greater than ever, because here's the thing. Katie Hobbs is now governor, and exposure is the greatest therapy. It's called exposure therapy for a reason. Exposure to this data. The whole aura, the persona, the nail-on chalkboard voice, the refusal to answer simple questions, going all the way back to the election season, refusing to debate, refusing to address criticism, refusing to answer questions from Arizonans, to now being in office and basically continuing the same exact strategy or practice. I think people are learning very quickly that electing this woman to office was a serious mistake, especially understanding the contrast just how competent, well-spoken, charismatic, strong and incredible Kari Lake is. I see that 25% of all votes signature threshold is light work, considering the amount of motivation there is in the state of Arizona to recall Katie Hobbs, and now we're also learning that Katie Hobbs is using her power as governor to launch investigations into Kari Lake, suggesting that she's committed a felony. They're trying to put her in prison now. Well, the motivation is greater than ever. You can see that Katie Hobbs is a tyrant, a wolf in sheep's clothing. She speaks with her soft, cringy voice, but really behind the surface she's yet again another leftist tyrant, refuses to address the voters of her state, refuses to provide basic transparency, and now she's trying to jail, to put in prison her political opponents. The motivation to recall Katie Hobbs is stronger than ever. Process frankly seems relatively simple and well within reach. And at this point, it's a waiting game. We'll have to wait and see how Kari Lake's appeal goes in the federal court. I'm honestly not really expecting much. I think it's going to be more same old, but the Kari Lake saga does not end here. Katie Hobbs and 3 or 4 months will be recalled. I firmly believe that we're probably going to see a recall election this year, and if that doesn't work, then we're probably going to end up seeing Kari Lake in the Senate taking Kyrsten Sinema. We'll have to see exactly what happens. All I know is that the drama and the fight in the state of Arizona is far from over. And then, this is some big news. So that was the pride and joy of New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez having a bizarre meltdown over the Republican-led Congress voting Minnesota Democrat Ilhan Omar off the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Republicans have long been vowing to do just that in view of Omar's history of anti-Semitic and anti-American remarks, which he's clearly done. She has a gift for verbal virulence against both Israel and the United States, and the Republicans promised retribution on that, which they just delivered. But for me, it was that rant. I frankly could care less about Ilhan Omar, find her utterly repulsive. But that repulsiveness took on a new embodiment by this narcissistic psychopath from New York, AOC. And what interests me here is how her response was typical of the woke mind virus, so I thought it would be actually fruitful for us to reflect a bit and see what this tells us in terms of what we're dealing with, in terms of our ongoing war with wokeism. First, you'll notice that AOC made this all about race, right? She went full-blown MSNBC on a student. Tell me this about Abdi Good. After Good Bad, she had a little Porky Pig moment there. Right. Condemnation. That's right. This is not about Attica. Condemnation of anti-Semitic remarks. This is about targeting women of color in the United States of America. That's what this is about. I feel it that the Holy Spirit, it's just coming over me. I feel this about targeting. It's about targeting women of color, to which my very first question is, what do you mean by woman? What the heck are you talking about? What do you mean by that word? Before we can play the race card here, almost broke my glasses. Before we play the wizard, what is this gender term woman that you use? What is it? Matt Walsh has an entire documentary of your fellow woke warriors having absolutely no idea how to even begin to define that term. So that would be my very first question is rent. My second question is, isn't uncritically assuming that other people are prejudiced? Isn't that itself a sign the prejudice? Isn't uncritically assuming that Republicans are racist? Isn't that kind of racist on your part? I mean, imagine if I did that, something like that with any other group? What if? What if I said, gypsies are all about targeting Europeans? I mean, that would clearly be a statement of prejudice, a prejudging of an entire group of people. Why is it okay when you do it? Why is prejudice bad for Republicans, but good for Democrats? But there's something else even more fundamental going on here, you see, playing the race card as part of a larger deck known as victimhood. Victimhood, this claim that one has been treated unjustly victimized. Victimhood works rhetorically because it automatically puts the victim in a posture of moral superiority. And the interlocutor, the person she's having the argument with, is immediately put on the defensive, since now, the interlocutor is no longer a person who simply disagrees with the victim. The interlocutor is now a victimizer, and that's a horrible thing. If it worked true, and not just a cheap rhetorical trick, intending to deliberately intimidate. It's also a fallacy. You'll notice that AOC used victimhood to diminish Ilhan Omar's responsibility for the things that she said. Right, that have nothing to do with her victimhood. According to AOC, Ilhan Omar is not morally responsible for anti-Semitic, anti-American remarks. And that's because she didn't say them. No, it's because she's a victim. You see, in the world of the woke mind virus, being a victim recuses you have any moral culpability? AOC is fabricating victimhood in order to allow Ilhan Omar to escape responsibility and culpability for what she clearly did. But then notice the bait and switch. AOC was pretty upset, wasn't she? We might say she was quite morally outraged, but how I thought that when one is designated a victim, you're recused from any moral transgression. That's true for the victim. But emphatically not the victimizer. No, the victimizer is beyond all redemption. The victimizer is the epitome of moral condemnation. And in the world of the woke mind virus, AOC and Ilhan Omar are never ever victimizers. They are always the victim. This is technically known as the stolen concept fallacy. It's the attempt to condemn the victimizer with the very moral standards from which you recuse yourself. Heads I win, tails you lose. AOC just treated all of us, literally the entire nation, to a temper tantrum that had no logical substance whatsoever. She denounced attacking women of color while at the same time denouncing anyone for trying to define what a woman actually is. She was utterly incensed over the violation of a moral standard from which she recuses her own self. All of this suggests to me that wokeness has no future. It's morally bankrupt, logically absurd. But until it blows itself up, taking its place on the proverbial ash heap of history, it still provides moments that are just fun to watch. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Open Source News. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notifications